Hi, you are watching SightsIn Plus, and this is Romesh Shiva's. Please to subscribe the channel for the HR news, for HR updates, and conversation with the top-notch CHROs, thought leaders, and business heads. Today, we are going to discuss the biases in hiring. You can also call it discriminations in hiring. And we have two senior HR leaders. Let me welcome Ms. Taniya Arora. She is Senior Vice President, Human Resources and Administration with Cheil, India. And Mr. Sahil Nayar is a renowned HR thought leader. Welcome, both of you. And my first question is do you think that there are biases in hiring? And if yes, then what are the common biases in hiring generally?
Okay, I feel yes, there are biases technically when we are hiring. So there are different types of biases. I feel that comes in. One is when you are referring a person. So that is where you want your known people actually to be, kind of put into the category of candidature that you're wanting to take. Secondly, something that I think a lot of our leaders, what we do is we try and find something or the other which is similar between us and the person we are recruiting. So some traits, some commonalities, something that that will make us work with that person with a little more ease. And you also somehow, we leaders, I think, sometimes feel that will he be able to understand if I say something. So that's another reason why we find someone who's like a silo, like something like us, someone who knows that what we say would be so that these are mainly two things that I see happening regularly when we try to do the hirings. And the third thing that I sometimes feel is they we stereotype the role. So the people who are taking the interview stereotype. So this role can only be done by men. This role can only be done by females. Those kind of things. Long hours, if somebody has to work, then they'll come back with the fact that, oh, he has to work long hours. So let take a female candidate. She might have reasons of going back. But if it's a male candidate, then okay, chalega. Those kind of things come in.
Yes, Sahil, what is your opening comment on this?
All right. I think Tanya has covered it very, very beautifully, but I just want to take one step back. And I think the bias starts at the stage of a job description. Hiring happens much later, but many a times we see job descriptions, even in today's world, where people write down, as Tanya mentioned, a certain gender bias, right? I want only male candidates or I want only female candidates. And it just gets me flabbergasted to wonder, why are we distinguishing roles based on gender? On one hand, we're talking about gender parity. On one hand, we're talking about men and women being equal and living in equal world. And on the other hand, many organizations have been guilty of actually discriminating on the basis of gender. I wouldn't even call it a bias. I would call it discrimination. That's point number one. Point number two, Romesh, biases are not just in hiring. Biases are in all walks of life, right? I think whether you're looking at being friends with someone, whether you're looking at society, whether you're looking at marriage, whether you're looking at associating with people, whether you're looking at corporations, decision making, at the board level, at hiring, biases exist everywhere. And I think the objective to my mind is one, to be very self-aware, that at least you're aware that you have a bias. Because if you're not aware, there is no way in which you can focus on at least reducing the bias, if not eliminating it. Coming to your question, what are the types of biases? I think Tanya has already covered three of them. We spoke about gender bias. Affinity bias is another big bias that I see in terms of, oh, this person is from my school or from my college, or I know this person is passed out from this institute, and therefore people who pass out from this institute have to be brilliant, right? And I think many of those kind of biases. In interviewing per se, we also see a lot of horn bias, halo bias, recency effect in terms of what resonates with you. And therefore, the person is more like you. You say, oh, you're also South Bombay. Oh, you also like having chart there. So we'll gel along well, right? And it's very, very, it may sound very bizarre, but when you go back and you really talk to a lot of people, you realize the response that you get with some people, if you ask them, they say maza nahi aaya. And when you ask them, what do you mean by maza nahi aaya? right? They're not able to tangibilize it, but that's the real fact of saying that the chemistry or the vibe didn't match. My caution out here is to say, are you evaluating people for competencies for a role that they're going to play in an organization, or are you matching chemistry? Of course, chemistry is important, no denial. But are you neglecting the competency for the role, or are you letting biases overshadow your decision making? And I think that's a very pivotal point we should talk more as we move ahead in this conversation.
So, Sahil, I think very beautifully you have also explained what are the biases in hiring. But one question also arises. Maybe suppose someone, your hiring manager belongs to South India, maybe. And if he's willing, the candidate from the South India, maybe because of the language, maybe because of the same culture, maybe some more similarities that may be there. He's feeling comfortable working with that guy or that girl. What's wrong with this? If you are getting the results, if everything is fine, what's wrong with this?
Okay. So let's break this up into two parts, Ramesh, without making it political and without making it sound as if we are taking sides. The first point I want to make very, very clear is there's nothing wrong in it, provided that the candidate is meeting all expectations of the role. If I am overshadowing the basic competencies needed, and I am building a bias towards a certain community or a certain sect or a certain caste because I believe that I can have ease of communication, that really doesn't help. Because imagine if I have to put this particular candidate you referred to in a North Indian market, and this person has never worked in that market, doesn't know how that market operates, doesn't understand the dynamics of the people of India from that region. I'm not quite sure whether my equation, if I put myself in the case that you just mentioned, my equation with this candidate is going to supersede his performance in that region. So the point that we're trying to make, both Taniya and myself, very clearly, number one, please hire for competencies and don't allow your biases to overpower competency. Point number one. Point number two, if at all you do have a certain bias and you're self-aware of that bias and that bias is allowing you to take a decision which is in the interest of the organization or the role or the chemistry, or you know the person from earlier and you know the past record and the person's delivered, I see that as a positive bias. You have a positive bias, you also have a negative bias. And I think that positive bias can be very beautifully neutralized when you get someone else to meet that candidate. Many a times when I know people who I've worked with in the past and they want to come back and work with me again, I know their past performance. So what I generally do is I'll get another colleague of mine to independently meet that candidate so that it doesn't get perceived as, oh, Sahil has worked with this person earlier and therefore Sahil is hiring the same person back. There's also another independent person who has evaluated that candidate based on the organization culture, fitment, role, all of that. And yes, given a green signal, and therefore now there are two or three people who believe that this candidate should join this organization. So I think that's a good way to neutralize what you would otherwise call as an affinity bias.
So in short, can I say that if there is no compromise on the capabilities, so affinity is fine?
From my perspective, if you're asking me, I don't see a challenge. I don't see a challenge at all. In fact, it is a plus plus, because if you work with someone earlier, if you know they have certain skill sets, if you know that they have delivered in their past performance, and you have not only got it validated by a couple of other people in the organization who don't know this individual, it adds to the entire chemistry and building the team. But also, in the same breath, let me tell you, the bias doesn't stop here. This actually becomes a larger problem when people in the organization start thinking or start perceiving that you are building a team of only people who worked with you in the past. So I think it's very important to also balance that out and not create a culture of being aloof or being a team that has only worked with themselves and doesn't cross pollinate or doesn't interact with other teams. So I think that you need to be mindful of, because sometimes what happens is when there is a lot of comfort and camaraderie and chemistry between a certain group of people, you may just very unconsciously end up excluding others and not building an inclusive mindset. And that may not be a bias, but that may be just a very natural fallout of you knowing each other for a number of years. So I think to be conscious of that and to ensure that even legacy team members or new team members or other team members part of the larger team are included in new projects, in assignments is very, very important.
I appreciate your response, very straight and without being political. And Taniya, how do you see how these biases are impacting the hiring process, hiring decisions specifically?
Umesh, I'll add on a bit more to what
Yeah,
Sahil had
please. Yeah,
said.
please.
Our industry is an advertising industry, okay? So we work on campaigns. We work with a lot of creative people. Now, the output of the creative world, as we say, where you see the ads and the designs and everything, everybody is unique to it, okay? So, and this whole industry is a very small industry. So it's not that, people don't know. It's not like the manufacturing worlds of, kind of a thing. So we do get a lot of references, okay? And these references will talk about the best of works, creative works, campaign works that these guys have done. Now, for us, what becomes very challenging is to make a proper mix of new candidates versus the reference candidates that we have. So what we do here, for you all to know very nicely, is so we take these resumes and then we have the interview. So there's somebody, if I know somebody and I'm referring somebody, I am not going to be the interviewer first and foremost. So it's going to be cross function. Somebody else is going to interview. But when it comes to a panel, so we have created a specialized panel to look into this. So these panel people are not ever told whether the candidate that they are looking at is a reference candidate or is coming fresh out of the market. You know what I mean? So it's a sourced candidate or is he a reference candidate? So what happens is we benefit from the fact that the evaluation technically is done on a very, very neutral basis. Of course, we see the work that the person has been doing in the past. We see the kind of outputs that have come back to us. So those are criterias. But then whether if it's a reference candidate or whether it's an independent candidate, that we don't tell anybody. So there we are quite structured, and I think we've been till now. Although we do sometimes take in a reference candidate who has an amazing work portfolio, but we would also see a good match, a mix rather, I would say, in my team. So that's where. So I wouldn't say it is bad, but I would also support the statement to say that we have to be very, very sensitive to the skills and the competencies we are looking for, rather than saying ki, okay, the recommendation has come from a very high person in my system in the hierarchy and we have to keep the person no matter what. And later, after 6 months, when the probation comes to a close, we realize, oh god, this guy is kind of not even performing to what I was expecting. So what do? I need to disassociate. That really hampers, I think, the total process. So it's not bad, but I think a proper mix and a proper way of interview the candidates as per their independent talents is very important.
And Tanya, do you think that these hiring biases are also impacting the diversity somehow?
I think biases have nothing to do with diversity. Diversity is technically what we have in our head. What how we perceive uh, the uh, the 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 position that's within the organization. So if the leader or the hiring manager says or thinks that the campaigns generally happen, late in the evenings, and whether the person, so he wantingly, unwantingly has already said, or rather told us that, no, I'm not looking for a female candidate. So this is what he has already done. But that does not stop us from actually giving. I'll give you a small example. I have had a good experience in the manufacturing world. Now, manufacturing, so there are these CNC machines, they're like huge machines to work on. And plants are generally not very, very inclusive to have women candidates in the plant due to various reasons. Now आप उसको safety, you say it's a safety reason or whatever, XYZ. So there was a big discussion with the plant head where we said that we actually want to get in female candidates working who are skilled enough to work on CNCs. So why not have them in? Why are we creating a barrier which says a girl cannot work on a CNC? And they have the certifications, they are skilled enough to work on it. So, why are we creating this barrier? So, to cut it short, at the end of the day, we did have female workers coming into the CNCs. So, I think it's very, very important first to develop our own thinking process where we ourselves categorize the jobs that we have, these positions are categorized. So let's not do that. Let's leave it open for everybody to come and analyze and put themselves in the picture.
Yeah, right, absolutely. So are we able to come out from this categorization? Still there is a categorization. Are you able to do it?
Romesh,
Female.
this is
So
a
that is the
cultural
challenge.
change. And I think we as HRs play a very, very major role into it. And I will not shy away from saying that it is more of a challenging question that we should ask our leaders who are hiring, as to why are you categorizing? Why can't you just take both of them together and evaluate their skills and see which one's better? Why do you have to really say, okay, my mind frame says ki this person will not be able to do it? So you have actually failed the other person. Forget gender. You've actually failed the person. So let's not do it that way. So this is where I think HR really comes into picture and plays, a kind of a person who asks them back as to why.
Maybe at this juncture, Romesh, I'll come in and I will share a very fantastic use case, right? A wonderful instance of where in a certain team, once upon a time, we had a situation where people would just end up hiring people they knew. All right. And they brought in a lot of people who they knew, and then people started talking and became the talk of the town, talk of the office to say, hey, you know what? This team has a lot of bias. These are the ones who are part of the inner circle. These are the ones who are part of the outer circle, so on and so forth, right? When you really see how people gel and how people don't really fit in into a certain team based on the characteristics of the team. What we did was, as a solution, we said, okay, now we will train or we will coach a certain set of people who will be as assigned interviewers. So these are the only people who will interview for whatever requirement that's there in the team. And then depending on the date of joining or depending on the skill set, they will start assigning people to different managers. So if I am a manager, I don't get to interview my team member because the person is not joining Sahil's team. The person is joining an organization. As long as the person is a fit for an organization, it doesn't matter whose team the person is joined because we're all one large team in a certain business unit. All right. This happened, it went on for 6 months in that respective organization. And after 6 months, what ended up happening was a lot of performance managers put their hand up and said, listen, I can't work with this person. Hey, this person is not good. There's a problem with this person. And the best way for them to just wash their hands away was to say, listen, I didn't interview this guy. I didn't select this guy. Right. And it was a very classic case because when we spoke to the head of the business, we said, listen, but all of your people who are interviewing are trained based on the competencies, based on the roles of your function. So how is it that people are just washing their hands away? They have evaluated based on exactly the job description, the skill sets, the competencies, so on and so forth. But that was a practical problem to deal with. The learning from that, Romesh, was a hybrid model. So we said, first level L1 interview, the manager will do. Whoever the person will work with, the candidate will work with the manager. L1 would be done by the manager. L2 will be done by a panel of senior members from that team who will not know which team this person is joining. They will just have the JD and they will have the candidate and they will independently evaluate. Now that became a perfect case study of getting a catch on the bias to say, hey, you gave me these notes saying this guy is very, very good on these points. I evaluated the person on the same points, and I don't think the person was very great. And a lot of biases actually came out in the L2 discussion because the L2 person was evaluating for the team, not for his individual team, but for the larger service line. And that became a great way to really identify biases that were prevailing and also pick them up so that they don't really go through the entire process.
which is a very good thing to do, Sahil, actually, because we've been practicing this for some time, and I've also introduced this concept in some organizations that I've worked with, and I think it's actually worked pretty well,
Yeah.
because you do get the right people, you move away from the biases, and I think the proper skills that we are actually looking at comes into picture. So yeah, this thing really works.
So, right, Sahil, if you see right now, so in most of the companies, so hiring is very tech driven. It is AI supported and data driven. Do you think still in AI system there are some biases?
Ramesh, AI, of course, is there and AI is all pervasive. But I'm yet to come across a situation where AI has helped eliminate a bias. AI, at best, has crunched a lot of data and has given us insights. But I think finally it is still with the human to decide whether they want to be privy to the bias, accept the bias, act on the bias, or not. Because if you're hiring from a certain college or a certain league, or you're hiring from a certain region in the country, all that data AI has been able to churn across and give it to us for teams. But specifically, have humans started looking at that data and then consciously taking a call? I haven't heard of any such case studies across organizations at this point.
Yeah, Tanya, you shared how generally you overcome the hiring biases in your organization, and Sahil has shared a couple of ideas how we can overcome the hiring biases. Anything else? Any more ideas you'd like to share how we can generally mitigate with the biases in hiring?
Very importantly, Ramesh, it's we as HRs, I think, play a very, very big role here. Anything innovative and constructive, when you see a pattern which is happening in certain verticals or certain departments, to break the pattern is important, because I personally feel that if you have too many biases coming in, then the output is always compromised on, because then you kind of get into a situation ki, okay, so this is the kind of person I'd gotten, and whatever he does is kind of turns out to the best. So that, from an organizational perspective, I guess is not a very, very good thing to do. So there, I think we HR should step up and play a huge role on asking as to why and why nots. Which we sometimes, during the pressure days, when you have too many positions to close, and things like that, just okay, fine, the person's closed, and just kind of finish the negotiation, let him join, and let's move. And that's not what we should supposed to do. We should take some
Yeah,
time there,
very true. I think, Ramesh,
because
just to add
moment we
three simple points, I think just to add to what Tanya said, right? First point, very, very clear. You need to really, if it's a grass problem, depending on the size of the organization, if it's a small, mid-size, or large organization, it'll play out differently. But what are the questions that the interviewer is asking, and how is that linked to the job? Many a times I see people ask questions that have nothing to do with the job or the job role. That's point number one, very clearly. So you know, and when you actually, as a recruiter, read the feedback of the interviewer, you should be able to assess, has the interviewer done a fair job of evaluating competencies for the role? If the comments are very generic, good communication will work well, the guy hasn't really played a very substantiative role in evaluating. Number two, we spoke about this on your channel the last time, I think skill-based hiring. The moment you start moving away hiring from just faffy stuff to accurate skills, what are the skills needed to perform the job? What are the tools and techniques you have implemented to evaluate that person's skills? And what is the score the person is getting on those skills in a very scientific manner? I think that'll be a great way to reduce bias. And third, as I mentioned earlier, don't just restrict it to one individual. If you can, if time allows, if it's a certain level of seniority of the role, have a panel in place. So when you have 4 or 5 people, or 2 or 3 people, or 1 or 2 evaluators, you get a good comparison in points of view or perspective that allows you to have a very fair, objective view of the candidate rather than one person taking a decision. So these are my 3 suggestions.
I think we have discussed all the important elements of the biases in hiring. We have discussed that what are the biases and how we can overcome. Maybe we can have the professionally trained panel for the interview. We can have the skill-based hiring and talent assessment. So, anything else which is important and we did not cover here as a concluding remark, Tanya, would like to share?
No, not exactly. Nothing much that I would really want to talk about. I think we've covered quite a bit of the topic in detail, but I honestly want to request our HR leaders here to be a little more sensitive towards the hiring, because I feel that there is a lot of gap, and hiring then becomes a way of life. You're just hiring for, because your position is open and you need to get in a person. Let's not do that. I really want to call out to them and say, please spend some time in this last bit of hiring that you do.
And Sahil, any of your final comments?
I think there was a time gap. I think, Ramesh, my final comments on this would be it's very, very important to strike a balance. I think many a times we keep saying, I want to meet one more candidate, one more candidate, one more candidate, and the candidate goes away, and no one's going to be keep waiting for you forever, right? On the other hand, as Taniya mentioned, many a times there's this pressure because you need to close positions, you need to get people on board, and we compromise very well, knowing that it may not be the best candidate, may not be a candidate who's very high on integrity, may not be a candidate who's going to be good into a good fit for our organization, but we still hire the candidate. And for all those people who make that cardinal mistake, many of us have also made it in our career. You realize it when you pay the cost. I'll repeat, you realize it when you pay the cost of a wrong hire. So that's the time you realize it, when it really pinches you. So please be very careful. Find that balance. Don't keep waiting for the so-called best candidate, because there is no best candidate in the market. And at the same time, don't rush through it so fast that you compromise on core values or what you believe are core competencies for the role, just for the heck of closing the position. Find the balance.
So I
And I
think
think
we have.
communication as well is very, very important here. Very, very important communication is what the person who's taking an interview, what is the kind of communication you are having as an HR with him to ensure that, yes, the questions are the right questions.
Ramesh, just 30 seconds before we close, I think I know we're running out of time, but very, very quickly, I think the most important thing is whether you hire or you don't hire, make sure the experience that you give that candidate is so world class that that person goes back and says, hey, I had an amazing interview. Maybe I didn't make the cut, or maybe I cleared the round, but I really enjoyed that experience. If we can focus on the experience, I think everything else will take care of itself. Back to you, Ramesh.
Right, right. So, Sahil and Tanya, I think we have been able to justify the topic. We have discussed about what are the generally biases in hiring, and this is very sensitive when it comes to the hiring or recruitment. That's also very sensitive. So, candidate experience definitely that matters a lot. Thank you so much, Sahil and Tanya, for joining the conversation and sharing your wonderful thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us all. Thank you.